All right, good morning everyone and welcome back, and hello to those joining us online. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land we meet on today, the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, and pay my respects to those who've walked, sung and danced on these lands for tens of thousands of years before us. Also acknowledge where you're all joining from online and pay respects to those traditional custodians as well. So this is our first panel session in our PID Awareness Week series of events, as we heard a little bit from Chris and Special Minister of State earlier. And the session today will focus on exploring how we can truly embed a speak up culture within the DNA of our organisations. We've got an esteemed group of panellists joining us, who I'll introduce in a moment, and we'll work through some questions with each of those. But while we're doing that, if there's questions that you'd like to ask or things that come to mind for you, we'll have the chance to take questions from the room, and also pop your questions into the chat online. We'll be actively monitoring what's coming through the chat, and if we don't get a chance to answer all of them in today's session, we'll make sure to come back and update you on each of those. Just a reminder that these sessions will be recorded and posted online afterwards. So if there's any issue for those joining us in the room with recording, just have a chat to the registration desk, and there'll be a prompt online just reminding people that we're recording each of the sessions as well. So without any further ado, I'll welcome and introduce each of our three panellists. So we're joined by Chris Clayton, who's the Senior Deputy Ombudsman at the New South Wales Ombudsman's Office. He was appointed to the Senior Deputy Ombudsman role just a few months ago, after working as the Chief Operating Officer at the New South Wales Ombudsman's Office since August 2021. In 2004 and 2025, Chris spent some time where he was appointed as Acting New South Wales Information Commissioner and CEO of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Prior to working at the New South Wales Ombudsman's Office, he had an extensive career holding several senior roles at the New South Wales Audit Office, including supporting the Auditor General in oversighting audit quality, provision of audit-related technical support, and innovation of audit practices and corporate governance. He holds tertiary qualifications, including a Bachelor of Commerce and Master of Administrative Law and Policy. Anina Johnson, who's the Commissioner of the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, also joins us today. And Anina has degrees in law and sociology from Murdoch University and a Master of Laws from the Australian National University, which she completed with the help of a Lionel Murphy Scholarship. Anita was appointed as Commissioner of LEC in May 2022, and prior to this held the position of Deputy President Forensics at the New South Wales Mental Health Review Tribunal from 2012 to 2022, where she sat in both the forensic and civil divisions of the tribunal. She was involved in strategic issues in relation to forensic mental health, including significant legislative reform. Prior to her appointment to the tribunal, Anina was a senior solicitor and solicitor advocate in the New South Wales Crown Solicitor's Office for 12 years, where she appeared in complex matters, including as counsel assisting the coroner in coronial inquests relating to policing matters. Anina is an adjunct professor with the University of New South Wales and has published and presented in the areas of mental health, criminal law and administrative law. We're also fortunate enough to be joined by Katharina Lowe, who's the New South Wales Public Service Commissioner, and she was appointed to that role in April 2020 after previously working as a Deputy Secretary for the Department of Communities and Justice. Katharina has extensive public sector experience, both at a state and federal level. She's held senior executive roles in New South Wales Department of Justice, New South Wales Audit Office, and New South Wales Information and Privacy Commission. She's on the board of the Australian and New Zealand School of Government and is a member of Chief Executive Women. Katharina has qualifications in law and economics. She's passionate about the pursuit of public interest and an advocate for diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to hand to each of our panel members now. We'll start with Chris, where we're just going to hear a little bit about them in terms of the theme of creating an embedding culture and public interest disclosures. So Chris, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Josh. Hi again, everyone. So I think some of the comments and reflections that I want to contribute at the start is just re-emphasising some of those opening remarks that we made, that were made about that good government relies on public officials speaking up. And that's borne out through the research that shows internal reports are one of the most effective ways for identifying serious wrongdoing. So it shows just how important encouraging and supporting a speak up culture is, because the fact that speaking up is the most prevalent way that wrongdoing is identified. I think this leads then into how you encourage that culture and ethical approach in the organisation to support a culture of speaking up. And that's not as straightforward as it sounds. I think that having a culture and ethics must permeate through the whole organisation, not rest with certain individuals that have been designated having roles within, for instance, the PID Act. This is something that needs to be pushed throughout the organisation and championed throughout. The other thing I wanted to mention, so culture and ethics are really vital, but public officials also need to feel safe when they have something that they would like to report in terms of serious wrongdoing. And I think that goes, again, beyond policies and procedures. That's about how you embed the sense that people have a safe space to speak up when something that they see is not right. I think that also then feeds into the no wrong door approach, because safety isn't going to always be certain for individuals. And so the PID Act does promote a no wrong door approach to people making disclosures. And I think that's really important, because whilst it's really important for all agencies to have their processes in place, sometimes public officials just will inherently feel unsafe to raise wrongdoing within their organisation. So this no wrong door approach is vital to make sure that despite those concerns, that disclosures of serious wrongdoing can still be looked at, investigated, and ultimately brought out in any investigation. The last thing I just wanted to mention was how we can recognise the impact that reporting wrongdoing can have. And whilst we haven't yet released our 2024-25 PID Act annual report, we can draw on some of the early insights from the 2024 PID Act annual report. And that was only for a 9-month period. But what it shows is that over 1,300 disclosures of voluntary PIDs were made in that period. And about a bit over half of those had been finalised by 30 June 2024. But importantly, of those around 730 finalised disclosures, 81 instances of serious wrongdoing were found. And these were matters that were raised by public officials throughout the course of their work. These are matters that didn't necessarily get highlighted on the front page of newspapers or in an integrity agency's investigation report. This is 81 instances of on-the-ground reporting that resulted in findings of serious wrongdoing. So that shows the impact of people speaking up. And I think that we need to recognise and to a certain degree celebrate the fact that through the PID Act channels, we've been able to identify serious wrongdoing at its core. So I think that's all I was going to mention. Hand over.
Thank you, Chris, and some poignant insights for us. I like the concept of the no wrong door policy, and thanks for sharing those early numbers, highlighting the importance and impact of speaking up. And Nina, we might hear from you. We go to Katharina first.
Sorry to throw out your order, Josh, and hello everyone, it's great to be with you today. Thank you. Sorry to throw out your order, and it's great to be with you today, everyone. So I just wanted to share some reflections from my perspective as Public Service Commissioner. And I do want to start by calling out that it's actually part of our duty to speak up. as public servants. It's part of our responsibilities. But I do, in the same sentence, want to acknowledge that to enable people to speak up, we actually need to have effective organisational cultures and environments in place. As many of you here would know, last year I issued a new code of conduct and ethics for the government sector. And that sets the minimum expected standards of behaviour that all of us are to uphold. And the code emphasises the importance of the sector's ethical frameworks and our core sector values of integrity, trust, service and accountability as key, really key, to promoting ethical behaviour in the sector. Now, as I said, these duties do include speaking up when we see something that might not live up to the expected standards and values, even if this might feel risky or uncomfortable. Now, behaviour that is contrary to the code and the ethical framework can contribute to creating unsafe workplaces. We know that it can undermine really productive relationships with colleagues and with members of the public. And also it can undermine public trust in our institutions, and that's really important to keep in mind. If we don't deal with the small things, ultimately we're talking about trust of the public in our public institutions. I want to call out that our leaders play a really important role in setting the tone from the top. Our staff look to our leaders as to what behaviour is acceptable or not acceptable. And if leaders do fail to act on concerns when they're raised, this does send a signal about, speaking up not being safe or not being welcome. And it's also really important for leaders to encourage people to speak up and not simply just to respond when somebody brings a concern to their attention. So that proactivity is really important. I thought I'd share a couple of data points from last year's People Matter employee survey, which gives us a bit of insight, I think, into what's going on in the sector. Now, last year we had 88% of respondents say that they know how to report unethical behaviour if they become aware of it. Now, that's a pretty good result, actually. It's a pretty good result. Unfortunately, only 51% of respondents to the PMES said that they believe their senior executives model the values of their organisation. So I think it's really worth leaders in particular reflecting on why that gap exists, and all of us thinking about, what do we need to do to create those cultures where people feel comfortable not only knowing what the right procedure is to report things, but actually reporting when something comes up. And when we create that culture where employees feel psychologically safe to speak up, we're actually enabling our public servants to meet their ethical obligations. So we really need to think about that architecture and that culture, and it is all linked together. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning, that if in an organisation people feel pressured to conform to a certain viewpoint, it can actually create ethical blind spots and poor decision making. So I think all of us have a role to play when it comes to really encouraging independent thought, being open to suggestions from other people, and being open to incorporating the perspectives of other people, regardless of their background, their experiences and different thinking styles. So that diversity of voices is incredibly important. So I might finish up on that issue of equity and diversity. I think there are lots of people in the current environment and that current conversation that's happening probably globally that think, equity and diversity is probably something that's a bit warm and fuzzy and maybe nice to have. But I think we really need to see equity and diversity as foundational to creating workplaces where ethical behaviour can thrive. When people feel respected, valued and included, they're more likely to speak up. They're more likely to trust their leaders and to feel psychologically safe to raise concerns. So I just want to leave you with that thought, and let's kind of mould together the equity and diversity lens with the PID lens. It's all part of that broader architecture that we need in our sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. Some important points, and the role and responsibility of leaders, but also the power of inclusion. Anina.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks everyone for having me today. I guess in echoing the comments that Katharina and Chris made, I also want to say it's actually really hard. Embedding a speak-up culture is difficult, and it's all very well to put out some nice material and PID Awareness Week. Trust me, I'm honest. I've got integrity. Nothing to see here. It's really hard for leaders, I think, if you, particularly where the comments or criticisms or concerns or allegations of wrongdoing perhaps relate to systems that the leader has been involved in designing themselves or has been championing or at least has been an integral part of. It's hard if the complaint is about people that you know or you like or you've worked with, and that's part of the challenge of raising a PID with someone's manager or with someone's more senior supervisor, is that often you are raising concerns about people that others will know. And I think we need to recognise that that's difficult. It's difficult to be open-minded when someone brings you something and says this is not working and this is wrong, and the natural human instinct is to go, what do you say now? I think it's fine. And you've just got to stop, pause, bite your lip and be a grown-up and listen with an open mind. I think that's the starting point at a very practical human level. I think the second challenge in terms of creating trust is the visibility of the PID system and the visibility of the outcome of complaints. So Chris has talked a bit about how the complaints do make a positive difference, and certainly in my role at the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, we've seen how complaints can really spark significant investigations. Often internal complainants spark the most the pointiest investigations, if I can put it that way. But it can be difficult to have that demonstrated within the organisation, especially as most complaints don't end up in either ICAC or the LEC. So most of the time they're confidential. Most of the time the outcome will be dealt with confidentially. The system might change, but it's not necessarily clear why that is. If it's individual instances of wrongdoing or misconduct, it's rare for that to be publicly called out and publicly named. Someone may just resign and move on, or disciplinary or performance management processes may be put in place and they're not made public for good, proper privacy reasons. But then how do you show people, including the complainant, that it's worth doing these things, that they can trust you to handle the comments that they're making well? And I think that's a real challenge. But what it does mean is when you are able to do it, you need to shout it from the rooftops. So if it's a systems issue or a practice or a policy issue, I think it's really important to give the accolades of the person to the person that brought that to our attention, and thank them, and genuinely so, for pointing out the problems or the risks that were identified there. And finally, I just wanted to say I think it's challenging. The other challenge is it can be hard to sort the wheat from the chaff. Is this a disgruntled employee who's bringing you some sour grapes because they're being performance managed or because they've had a falling out with someone in the team? And it's, again, easy to dismiss complaints as being just someone that is whinging or backstabbing their colleagues. And this comes back to sort of some of that notion of building a culture, that actually it is part of our integrity business to bring these things forward. I think it's also important to remember that just because someone's motivations are not pure does not mean that what they're saying is not right. In fact, quite often, that's when you get your best integrity issues raised, is because someone has been seeing this conduct going on and they were happy to live with it while they were inside the tent. But once they're outside the tent, they will call it out. And that's where we've actually had the most effective whistleblowing complaints over time. So it's hard, but important and worth doing and worth persevering. And you've got to be a grown-up if you're going to do it well.
Thanks, Anina. And thanks for calling out that it can be tough and uncomfortable to speak up at times. Chris, I'm going to come back to you, but we're going to go a little bit deeper, either in your organisation or organisations that you've worked in. Can you share some insights as to how you've created a speak-up culture to become part of the DNA and the fabric of the organisation?
Yeah, I think the first call out there is that there is no one size fits all, and we have to recognise the the uniqueness of each of our organisations, that something that might work for an organisation that has 30 individuals in it is unlikely to work for an organisation with 3,000 individuals. So finding those right levers to pull to cultivate a strong speak up culture is key. And I think part of that is also figuring out how to move beyond the legislation, policies and procedures and move into meaningful change. And that's not to suggest that those elements aren't important, because I think that they're foundational. Without strong policies, processes, you cannot build a sustainable culture and healthy culture at that. So I think that they're really important. But I think what comes next from that is how you empower your leaders to implement the intent of the PID policies and processes that's going to be relevant and resonate with their staff. So that might mean that certain teams in certain organisations have a slightly different approach because they might have a slightly different need at that particular time. Because it's also important that we talk about culture, and that's really important, but organisations, especially larger ones, will have subcultures, and they're going to be at different levels in terms of how well they're able to embrace a speak up culture. So trying to apply even a uniform approach within an organisation is unlikely to yield strong results. So I think part of it is about just recognising that our organisations are not homogenous, and being able to respond to that is really quite important. I think some of the practical elements really are about how leaders can have their regular conversations with staff and team members that draw out the concepts and culture of speaking up. So most of us probably have regular one-on-one conversations with our direct reports or our staff, and probably they're going to cover some fairly routine transactional matters. How's this piece of work going? How are the team working on a particular problem? But I think it's a golden opportunity to also stand back and talk about, well, what's happening in the team or in that particular unit that might be bubbling away under the surface, that might be relevant to our success and what I would call ethical success at that. So it's about being attuned through those regular interactions we have to picking up elements where our culture might not be supporting a speak up mentality within units. So it really is about using those opportunities. It's not just about PID Awareness Week, for instance, and we move on. It's about how we embed the concepts throughout our day-to-day. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that we need to do and continue to do.
Thanks, Chris. Good insights. Katharina, I might come to you. I know you touched on code and values, but beyond that, what's your insights on embedding a culture within the DNA?
Yeah, sure. I might pick up something that has already been mentioned here, and that's the no wrong door approach under the PID Act now. And what that means, I mean, there's benefits to that, and there's also some challenges with that as well. So it's great that you don't actually have to find a specific door to open and go through to receive the protections. But what it means is that we've now got a greater range of people who can actually receive disclosures. And so there's a question of how do we ensure that these greater range of people are equipped to respond appropriately when somebody does come to them. And what the research tells us is that an employee's direct manager is probably the most likely person to receive a report of wrongdoing. So what we need to equip our managers to do is to listen up when somebody speaks up. So we talk about this speak up culture, but that really needs to be complemented by that listen up culture. And what I mean by that is, you know, picking up on what Anina said, when somebody comes to you, it's not automatically dismissing a concern because that person is regarded as a bit of a troublemaker. It's really encouraging our people managers to respond with an open mind, with curiosity, to ask questions, and not go straight to an outcome and to be able to refer the concerns raised to the right place in the organisation to make that assessment. So in practice, what this could look like for a manager is, you know, setting aside adequate time to sit down with that team member who has a concern, to actually listen, to understand what it is that the person's raising, and to work out, well, what are those next steps for action? And listening up means, you know, not jumping to a judgment immediately. And it's also about listening with empathy and a level of understanding and treating all of those allegations seriously, not sort of disregarding them at the outset. And the other thing I probably would mention before handing over is, you know, before people raise concerns, the hard work needs to be done well before that. You know, we need to be communicating those messages about, well, what are our expectations? If somebody makes a PID or raises another concern, what is that process? How will they be kept safe during that process? And our managers also need to know how to manage expectations, because we know that if expectations aren't managed or aren't met, it can undermine all that great work that might have been done to drive that speak up culture. And I think sometimes people need a bit of a reality check on expectations. People can sometimes assume, if I raise that, the person I'm raising it about will be sacked at the end of this process, when that is not always the case, and that will actually be the minority of cases. There's a raft of other appropriate responses that can be taken, and, you know, terminating somebody's employment is a really serious step, and that would be reserved for the most serious wrongdoing. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Katharina. And a really critical relationship, that people-leader relationship. Anita, what about you, creating a speak-up culture?
So I think I wanted to say, sort of echoing what Chris and Katharina have said, it sits on the back of a more general culture of embracing feedback, of having, so you can't expect that someone will raise a PID when they're not permitted to speak up otherwise more generally. So that's about operational decisions, about how you run your organisation, about where you're going to have your Christmas party, all those the big and the little things. Is it the kind of culture in your organisation which is open and responsive? Because if you've got that, you probably won't get a PID, because people will actually be able to just say, I'm not sure that that's the right path we should be going down, and actually just call it out openly without having to label it as a PID or a protected disclosure. But it's also the kind of thing that will encourage that level of trust. It will encourage staff and teams to feel that if they do raise something, it'll be listened to, as Katharina said, it'll be taken seriously, a response will be given, and ideally there'll be some feedback and report on the outcome. So it's actually all good people management. Builds the bedrock on which you're more likely to get those disclosures, or perhaps even, ideally, you reach a time when you don't need those disclosures because people are comfortable enough raising concerns on an ad hoc basis just in the course of their day-to-day. I'd say also, so calling out that this is a hard work to do, the LEC has recently done a cultural review, acknowledging that we needed to do some work uplifting our culture in that respect. Not that we're broken, but that we could do more. And so you can also be really deliberate about it if that's something that you think needs some further attention within your organisation. Having done the review and the work to put into it and to think about the values that we wanted to bring forward in the LEC, which were courage, innovation and clarity, I think all really key values to a good PID speak up culture. We also need to then do the work to actually live that and maintain that, and not just have it as a sparkly piece of sort of review with, you know, lovely cultural values that get stuck on the wall and forgotten about. So then there's the bit that where you work it, and where people, perhaps fellow leaders, call out if you're not doing it. That's the other thing. So leaders can keep one another accountable, as well as staff keeping their leaders accountable for actually living it day to day rather than just talking about it.
Thanks, Anina. Good segue. I was going to talk about the embedding process beyond culture, so you've touched on that for us. Katharina, what are your thoughts on embedding the culture? So we've spoken about how we create it, but what are the activities we need to do to sustain and embed? Speak up.
Sure, and I'm just going to get really practical, I think, in response to this question. I think I alluded before to making sure that our leaders and people managers have the capabilities, and that means, first of all, doing the training, and I want to commend the Ombudsman's office. I've done the training and it's actually really, really good. And as we all know, when somebody raises a concern, it can be done verbally, and they're not necessarily going to say to you, I am making a PID now. So you need to be tuned in enough if you're the one receiving the comment in, it might be a much larger conversation, to what you need to pick up, what you need to understand, the questions you need to ask. Because if you don't, pick up on those things can go pear-shaped pretty quickly. Another way I think we can really embed it is through scenario-based discussions with our teams. I think you could be surprised about how people's views can diverge on a particular scenario, and it's actually useful to work through these things together. And I'm going to be really opportunistic now and say that next month my office, together with ICAC, are going to be publishing a document which will contain a bank of ethical dilemma scenarios for teams to work through together and to discuss. And I think it's really good to get real about it and to work through these things together, because people will have different perspective and someone else may pick up a perspective or angle that you haven't thought about. So please keep an eye out for that. I think picking up on what Anina said, if somebody does speak up, you can commend them for that and reinforce that it is safe to speak up and it's a good thing to speak up. And I think also looking for other ways to send those anti-corruption messages, those ethical messages outside of formal training is really, really important. So something we do in my office is, we talk about reports that are released by the Ombudsman's office, by the Audit Office, by ICAC, and we just reflect on, well, what happened there? What are the issues there? And what can we do if something like that were to happen to us? Is there anything we can do to prevent it? So we talk about it in a really informal way, and it's, just building it into everyday conversations and learning those lessons as we go. But, ultimately we can have all the policies and processes in place, but as others have said, it's about walking the walk. So it's really reflecting on, is there a visible alignment in what we're actually doing day to day to what we're saying in our policies and processes?
Thank you. Thanks, Katharina. And we'll watch this space for those ethical scenarios. Chris, what's from your perspective, how do we go to embedding?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Katharina, for the product placement in there. That was unsolicited. Because I do honestly think that for instance, the Ombudsman's reports are really quite valuable resources for all public officials. For instance, we recently released our case study, 6-monthly case study report, and within that we talk about complaints that we've received and how we've handled them, but also key takeaways from the resolution of those complaints and what can be learnt by other agencies in how to handle complaints. So really encourage people to read those and to apply the lens of public interest disclosures to that as well. But more substantively to this question, I think we need to recognise the practicalities of the public service as well. The fact that we have a great mobility scheme available to us means that our organisations aren't static. So it's one thing to reinforce a message 6 months ago. That's no guarantee that the same people are going to be here to receive a similar message in 6 months' time. And we do have mobility, which means that people are coming from within the sector, but also outside the sector, who might have experienced a different culture to the one that your agency is trying to embed. So there's an element of repetition in that, but I think it's more about how we reinforce our messages in a consistent and clear way, so that all of the public officials within your organisation at that point in time are really receiving a clear message around the expectations of a speak up culture. The other thing to touch on is probably also to reflect on some of the conversations that we've had around it's not always going to be possible to put up in lights the outcomes of disclosures. And that in and of itself is a challenge, but I think it's about how we make sure that we're connecting back to the disclosures as part of the PID handling process, because whilst that individual might not then go away and start talking in favourable terms about the outcome, they will become, if we've handled their disclosure well, they can become a champion for the way the agency is handling PIDs in general. And that can, even in a small individual instance, grow and reinforce the culture that you're trying to embed. So I don't think you should underestimate the value even of reporting back in a confidential individual way. It is absolutely about trying to take those opportunities to emphasise how disclosures have made a difference at a system level, but sometimes, as Anina said, that's just not possible. But it's about how we can take advantage of even those smaller interactions that we have along the way.
Thanks, Chris. Anina, anything you wanted to build on around embedding that culture?
So I think Katrina and Chris have stolen most of my lines. But what I did want to, one other thing to reflect on was the possibility of dealing promptly and celebrating the sort of operational matters where there's a risk of misconduct. So sometimes when you review your systems and your processes, someone might say, listen, I don't think there's anything going on here, but this facilitates it. So what we see, for example, in the work that I do is the improper use of social media to repost material that's happened in public sector. So the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission oversights police, so we see police reposting on WhatsApp entertaining material that they've seen during the course of that work, but that's completely inappropriate. So some of it is about calling that out at a general systems level, but some of it might be about calling out that if we do it in this way, that allows this opportunity to arise, and if someone was so inclined, that would lead us down, that would allow for a risk of misconduct. So I think what we can, and that's something that can be called out. Thank you very much for pointing this out. That's excellent. I hadn't thought of it in that way. Brilliant. Let's change our process so that that's not possible to do that. How could we go about doing it? Ask for advice, ask for suggestions. Good, well, let's incorporate that. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Josh for pointing out that the process that we had in place had some misconduct risks built into it, and we've managed to close this off thanks to his good eagle-eyed spotting, right? So by doing something in that kind of way, you're not calling out any one individual, you're not calling out particular instances that need to be subsequently investigated, but you're pointing out the value of having that kind of eye to things and then closing down those systems risks. So that was my only other.
Thank you, and that value is important. Thanks, Anina. I might stay with you, but just a quick reminder to the group, we will have time for questions. I've got one more question I want to ask the panel, and online as well, pop your questions in the chat. You touched on it a little bit already, Anina, but keen to understand some of the challenges about creating and embedding a speak-up culture, and perhaps particularly in your organisation.
So, we oversight a law enforcement organisation. It's a hierarchical organisation, it's a uniformed organisation, but I think we would be naive to think that police are the only organisation that has that kind of inherent challenges. So the hierarchical organisations have often developed in that way because they are designed to respond in emergencies. They're designed to do things that many of us don't want to do. Go into situations of danger, go into emergencies, respond quickly, where there's not the opportunity necessarily to have the conversation about whether this is really the right way, or should we just sit back and have a ponder about how we're going to tackle this armed offender, for example, or this fire, or this ambulance as well, another uniformed hierarchical organisation. Let's remember health is actually a very hierarchical organisation, and again, developed in contexts where people need to respond to situations quickly and directly, and the chance for the all-round conversation about whether this is the appropriate format and should we really be dealing with it. And people are like, yeah, bleeding out now, let's get going. So there's reasons why those organisations have developed in that way, but it also means that there's inherent challenges in speaking truth to superiors, in calling out superiors. There's very much a sense that if the person higher up in the hierarchy thinks something is the case, then it is the case. And then there's also very much an us and them, a code of silence about what goes on within your organisation, because there is that, and this has been well documented. Justice Wood talked about it in the Wood Royal Commission back in the mid-1990s, but it's been documented since and before, and in other jurisdictions and in other organisations. No one knows what it's like to be in my shoes, so don't you tell me how we're going to do it. This is what I need to do to get my job done. So there's that challenge. Can I say as well, talking specifically about policing, police are almost always people of integrity, and they're people that value integrity. You don't go into policing because you want a cushy life, right? You go there for public service in the same way as we all do as public servants. And I think the challenge is to break down that code of silence, is to say that actually you want to be confident that the person that is running towards danger beside you, that the person that is also wearing blue, thanks Katarina for the bit of a prop there, the person that is running towards beside you into danger has the same values and integrity you do, and if they don't, it is your job. It is your as an officer of integrity, it's your responsibility to speak up. Police have their own, in addition to their own code of conduct, and they actually have a statutory code of conduct. And the first item in Section 7 of the Police Act, if anyone interested in the room wants to look it up, is integrity above all. And part of that is actually saying, that wasn't right. Sir, ma'am, that wasn't right. That takes enormous courage in the police force. This system isn't right, the way we treated that person wasn't right. I think we need to do these things differently. It's not okay to bully or harass or sexually discriminate or call your colleagues racist names. So there's all of those real challenges in the police. I think the answers often lie in the same kinds of things of encouraging open conduct, encouraging open feedback, being receptive to it, and being taking it on board, keeping confidentiality where that's needed. So those are all those things, the same kind of solutions that we found elsewhere, but it's the culture is so tight, and the culture of frankly targeting people who do speak up is very prevalent. And just coming back to something Chris said earlier, which is policing, health, other uniformed organisations also have a very tight culture within their own command, station, hospital, local health district. So that siloed culture is really tight, and you can get great people and great cultures, perhaps with great leaders, and when that leader moves on, the challenge is to maintain it, and the challenge is to get that culture to trickle down from the top or built up from the bottom.
Thank you. Thanks, Anina. And a good reminder about the complexity of cultures that exist across the varied public sector organisations. Chris, what about from your perspective, thinking about challenges? We've heard some of them.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is just misreading the information or lack of information you've got around the culture or measurement of culture in your organisation. And I think the biggest mistake that you could make is, oh, well, we're not getting PIDs, so that must mean that everything's great. But I think that's a real misapprehension if you interpret it that way. But I think it's then also about how you make sure you are looking at the information that you have available. And so, for instance, in the public sector, as Katharina said, we have the People Matters Employment Survey. And whilst that is a very broad survey and covers a lot of topics, it provides really strong insights into what your people are telling you about the culture within your organisation. And I would really encourage agencies that when they get the results to really reflect deeply about what the information is telling you. And whilst that may not result in really straightforward action plans that you can tick off quite quickly, it's really important to reflect and listen to the results so that you can continuously work on the culture. And I think if the culture isn't where you want it to be, I think you have to take a big dose of reality that it's going to be a lot of effort, but conscious effort to work on that and to improve it. So I think that whilst the PMES is for state agencies and the PID Act covers local government and universities in New South Wales, have a look at your staff surveys to see what they're telling you about the culture and behaviours within your organisation. It's really key that you take those on board.
Thanks, Chris. And Katharina, from your view and perspective, challenges?
Yeah, just agree with what the panel has said so far. And look, I think another challenge is that, you know, one of the reasons people give for not speaking up is that they expected somebody else would do it. But what we need everyone, I guess, to understand is we actually all have a responsibility, each and every one of us, to act and speak up if we see wrongdoing. So that's a challenge. And I want to, I guess, reinforce what Chris said about the People Matter Employee Survey. I think leaders should see it as a strategic tool in managing their organisations. And it's also a really useful tool to open up conversations with your people and really listen to what's going on and dig beneath the results and the numbers that you see on paper. So that conversation piece and that listening piece is really important. Look, the other thing I just wanted to add in response to this question is that I think one of the solutions here is for us to build cultures that really value the core values in our sector, so values-based cultures, and that those values are actually what unite us across the sector. And when we're building culture, I think it isn't about sort of those grand gestures or those once in, you know, every occasion speeches that a leader might make. Culture is built by everyday actions, and sometimes those actions can actually seem small or insignificant, but actually send signals about what's important and valued within an organisation. One of my statutory responsibilities is to promote the sector's core values. And once again, I'm going to use this opportunity to promote our very first Values Week, which will be held next month from the 8th to the 12th of September. We'll have a series of events. We'll also share a series of resources, and we'll talk about and celebrate the core values in our sector and how to bring them to life. So we'll have some great speakers from within the sector, but we'll also have some great speakers from outside the sector where we can learn lessons from other organisations as well. And finally, if you're not aware, we do actually have a community of practice for ethical behaviour, and that's a partnership between my office and some of the integrity agencies, and I really encourage you to become a member of that compact. We have actually thousands of members now. We have 4 events a year, and we have some really interesting speakers and discussions at those compact events. So just really want to promote that to you. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Katharina, and important to build culture and values. Some great points raised by the panel. I just want to take an opportunity to see if there's any questions from those joining us in the room or questions from our online participants. Got one at the front.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hoskins from Department of Customer Service. I've got a question probably best placed with Chris from the Ombudsman. I'm just wondering if you can share any success stories, if you're able to call out a specific department or organisation who have seen a significant uplift in their speak up culture and any initiatives that they might have implemented.
Yeah, thanks. I probably won't call out individual agencies. No. But I think what we're seeing, some of the more successful agencies are taking it seriously in the sense that they're not seeing the PID Act, for instance, as a compliance a compliance exercise. And we fully recognise that agencies have got quite a significant and broad-ranging set of requirements that they need to comply with beyond the PID Act, that there are many things that they need to comply with. But I think what the more successful agencies are doing are seeing this as an opportunity beyond a compliance piece of making sure they've got a PID policy in place, making sure that it's on the website and on the intranet. They're actually seeing the opportunity that they can leverage these really important conversations that I think we've all spoken about embedding those, and also seeing that how valuable it is to encourage a speak up culture, because it's teaching organisations things that they may not ordinarily have access to. So I think, again, without calling out individuals or agencies, I think it really is about those that have gone, wow, this is a golden opportunity for us. And yes, we will do our compliance exercise, we'll do our PID annual returns and whatnot, but it's about how they've shifted the mindset and maturity of compliance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And some nodding from Katharina. Did you want to build on that?
I might highlight again the importance of the PMES. So they are published on the Premier's Department website, and you can go through and check how agencies are doing around the engagement score and the culture questions. And if you're interested, where you see an agency doing really well on some of those scores, why don't you reach out to them and see what you can learn from them? You know, we've got a lot of good practices happening across the sector. We just need to find ways to share and magnify the good practice.
Thanks, Katharina. Thanks, Chris. Tom, I might go to you. I think we've got a question from one of our online participants.
Thanks, Josh. We've actually got a couple on a similar theme, asking for how to embed a strong speak-up culture in an organisation where leadership may not have the appetite for it, driven by concerns that may arise around GIPA requests or potential media leaks.
Thank you. So the question, if you could grab that online, it's about how do we build a speak-up culture where there might not be an appetite from management. Katharina, we might start with you.
Yeah, I think that you need to have a leadership that accepts that they have a key role in building that sort of culture. Now, there will be some channels within the organisation where if you don't think your leadership is on the right path, there might be some channels to raise that, and it might be with your immediate manager, it might be through the conversations that happen after the PMES is shared. There are also some open questions in the PMES where you can put a narrative response. So those questions are, you know, what's good that's happening in your agency that you want to continue? And then the other question is, well, what's something that you would change or something that you'd like your agency to do? So there are some safe channels in which to raise those comments. And I'd also say, you know, the PMES is confidential, and those narrative comments are only shared where that work group has 30 or more staff. So if it's under a certain threshold, those comments won't be shared. So there are ways to raise these things confidentially if you're concerned about that.
Thanks, Katharina. Anina, as you touched on some of the challenges in the microcosms of culture, but...
So I think the thing is you can use this speak up culture to hear firsthand from your employees about what's going on, or you could expect it'll be raised elsewhere. I'd opt that someone told me before I read about it in the media. I'm not that courageous. So I think it's a difficult conversation to have. It is challenging if leaders really haven't got that, because I think it's fundamental to the leadership of a public sector agency that they appreciate that that hearing, if there's criticisms to be made, let's hear them here. Let's hear them in-house. Let's unpack them. Let's respond. Let's tell you what we can do. Let's tell you what we can't do, and have that response there. And I think that's the kind of thing that actually builds stronger workplace engagement generally. And so again, recognising that the police, for example, the agency I'm most closely involved with, have actually engaged an external consultant now to look at some of their employee retention issues and to look at bullying and sexual harassment within the police workforce, because they recognise that that's been a significant issue and part of what's contributed to attrition of police across the year. So police are not alone in that problem. If you've got problems internally, you'll lose good staff. So let's hear about what's happening now. Tell me, rather than telling the media.
Thanks, Anina. Tom, no other questions online. What about from those in the room? Any other questions for our panellists? Got one up the back.
Thank you. David Walton. I'm with the Department of Creative Industries, etc. I'm also a former councillor, so I'm interested to hear, particularly from the Ombudsman, and having come from the banking industry, where you have a very good regulator in APRA that ensures that the banks are measuring, monitoring and taking corrective action around culture. So what is the Ombudsman doing to ensure, from smallest council to the largest government department, that they are measuring, monitoring and taking corrective action around culture?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's really important. And it also, I guess, goes to the oversight function that the Ombudsman has in the PID Act. So our role is not just to promote the objects of the Act with public officials and agencies, but it's also about how we monitor agencies' implementation of the objects of the PID Act. And so just this year we've released a survey, self-assessment survey, to get more information from agencies we oversight about how they've implemented the PID Act. And part of that information, in conjunction with the PID annual returns, is feeding into our intelligence around the audit work that we'll be doing into the future. So where we start to see concerns or issues that might identify particular agencies are at greater risk of not adopting the principles of the PID Act, the Ombudsman has the ability to go and do specific targeted audits of those agencies. And those reports can be made public into Parliament as well. So part of that full spectrum of monitoring activity is not just receiving information, it's then about how we go about and use that information to uplift the sector more broadly. So I think there's certainly more work to do, recognising we're nearly at 2 years of implementing the PID Act. We're now getting some really strong data sets that we can start to make those informed decisions around our monitoring activity.
Thanks, Chris. And Katharina, you wanted to build on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. So in the New South Wales public sector, we have a number of statutory officers who have different statutory remits, but they're complementary statutory remits, and I think it is incumbent on us to work together. So obviously the Ombudsman's office, has that lead role in relation to PIDs. The Auditor General, looks at waste and things like that. I've got a role around, the code of conduct and integrity and ethics, and making sure the merit principle is applied in recruitment and appointments. ICAC obviously has that anti-corruption focus. So I think we are trying to make greater efforts to work together more seamlessly and collaboratively to make sure our work complements each other and we can build on each other's work.
Thanks, Katharina. Good call out on alignment. We've got time for one more question if anyone in the room or online has any questions for our panel before we wrap up today. Question up front.
Thank you. More a comment, I guess, than a question, but I guess two things. One is that culture can be eroded over time, and so it takes a long time to build. And so it's not so simple as, what do you do to build a speak up culture? It's something that takes commitment from the broader remit within the sector and within an agency. Second thing is, and Katharina talked about a values culture, and sometimes I talk about a pro-integrity culture, but relying only on PIDs is problematic. because, and Anina, you mentioned this, you kind of need this process where you look at where your integrity risks are. And so receiving PIDs is one way of knowing after the fact normally, but also having that kind of process where you say, well, these are our high risk projects, or we have a lot of procurement, or whatever the case may be, and kind of having those policies and procedures and a culture piece around that as well, and identifying corruption risks, etc. So it's not just, you know, one side of it, it's kind of this matrix.
Couldn't agree more with both those points you've made. So we not only have to build the house, we've got to maintain the house, to use that analogy with culture, and absolutely agree. PID is one part of a broader architecture, and I might just take this opportunity to let people know that my office is working on an integrity maturity assessment tool for agencies, which will release later this year. It will enable agencies to self-assess, but I'm seriously contemplating an ongoing program of work where my office comes in and assesses agencies as well.
Can I just add in, I think that's certainly something we see really clearly, that idea that firstly, trust and a sense of speaking up is hard to build up and quite easy to lose, and it also can't be related to just one individual. So I think the sort of nature of police structures means you see individual commands, and you see there are some amazing commanders, and they've built up really strong, positive, integrity-based commands, cultures within their command, but or positive policing practices, or however you want to frame it. And if they move, the challenge is to keep them embedded and replace, and sort of the challenge is to spread that rather than have it sort of picked up and then fall into a heap again when that person leaves. So this whole speak up culture can't be dependent on particular individuals within an organisation who are champions. It just has to be the way we do stuff here.
Thank you. Thanks, Anina. Please join me in thanking Chris, Anina and Katharina for their insights this morning. And a big thank you to those that joined us in person today and also joined in the conversation online. There's plenty of ways you can get involved in PID Awareness Week. This is the kickoff, so be sure to be involved through the week. And we'll be sharing a survey for you to give feedback on our events and how things run as well. But thank you again for joining us, and happy PID Awareness Week.